The hearing will come to order, and good afternoon to everybody. Since 1987, the Lord's Resistance Army, or LRA, has killed, raped, kidnapped, enslaved, or robbed thousands of people in the Great Lakes region of Africa and beyond. In October of 2011, the Obama administration deployed about 100 military advisors to help Ugandan and other military forces in the region to set out and capture or kill the members of a terrorist force that has now dwindled from thousands of fighters in the late 1990s and early 2000s to fewer than 200 today, but remains a very real danger to people in the east and central regions of Africa. This hearing will look at why the efforts to end the LRA are so critical for the international community and especially for the people who live in that region, and how the United States counter-LRA program has worked so far. Today's hearing is being held even in the absence of the Department of Defense or the State Department, whose relevant officials are unavailable for a few weeks, and we will invite them and do a second hearing with them because it will serve as an acknowledgement of the importance of countering the LRA prior to the administration's decision on whether to continue the program. The decision on renewing the American deployment will come in the next few weeks. We trust the administration will decide to continue this worthy effort. We hope to cover U.S. counter-LRA policy with administration witnesses, like I said, and they have been invited. We're just waiting for them to give us a date. One can use a number of metaphors to describe the LRA today. It is like a wounded animal, less capable but still very dangerous. It is like a vulture feeding off the existing misery it finds in countries otherwise troubled by conflict. The LRA is like a fire that is tamped down but not extinguished and can reignite at any time. However, the danger posed by the LRA is not metaphorical. It is very real to those who still live in fear in Eastern and Central Africa, and certainly to the hundreds of child soldiers whose lives have been harmed by its work. The LRA is a vivid example of how ethnic strife can provide a cover for wanton viciousness. In the name of protecting the rights of Uganda's northern Kony tribe, LRA founder Joseph Kony has brought out only wretchedness to his people and their neighbors, as well as to people living in surrounding countries. Efforts to come to a negotiated settlement have all come to naught because Kony apparently has no coherent demands. His terrorist group seems to want nothing more than chaos, murder, and destruction. The international community has been much too quick to abandon humanitarian activities, largely because the number of victims has been reduced significantly. In confirmation hearings before the Senate Armed Services Committee last year, General David Rodriguez referred to the counter-LRA effort as a good success story, citing the group's decline in the American determination to support African officials to finish off the LRA. Unfortunately, this is where the metaphors about the group must be kept in mind. Whenever the LRA has had a setback due to international efforts to eliminate it, the group's retaliation has been ruthless. Ongoing conflict in Central African Republic, South Sudan, and the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo has provided a welcoming environment in which the LRA can hide and resume its deadly activities with less fear of regional government action against it. When we take your eyes off the LRA, they have enhanced maneuverability and opportunity to regroup. Thanks to the hashtag Kony 2012 campaign by the advocacy group Invisible Children, who also paid a visit to my office in New Jersey, LRA became notorious worldwide and garnered international support, especially among the young, on behalf of a robust counter-LRA effort. Yet the staying power of social media is fleeting. There are always new causes, also legitimate and important, to draw attention away. Remember the Bring Back Our Girls on behalf of the Chibok schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram. Our caring has to extend to the victims of the LRA and other such groups, which not only include those whom they attack, but also those whom they cruelly use in their destructive campaigns. We have one such victim with us today. Who can describe the ongoing desolation the LRA brings to so many young lives. We also have witnesses familiar and expert with the LRA and its terrorist activities who will describe the ongoing threat that the group poses, however diminished their ranks may be. Countering terrorist groups cannot depend on Twitter campaigns. The United States and other members of the international community must retain our resolve to capture or remove the leaders of the LRA and any terrorist group that threatens the lives and well-being of innocent people worldwide. whether such groups pose a direct, confirmable threat to the homeland or not. By terrorizing those whom we help, they oppose U.S. interests, and they must be dealt with. I'd like to yield to my good friend and colleague, Karen Bass, for any comments you might have.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership and for calling for today's hearing and the continuing U.S. support toward that effort. This hearing offers us an opportunity to discuss the current state of affairs related to the movements and activities of the LRA and its notorious leader. My hope is that today's hearing will inform us of what the next steps that the U.S. government should take to help end the violence, kidnapping, and abuse that has been the standard practice of the LRA for decades. I'd also like to thank today's witnesses for agreeing to participate in the hearing, including regional experts from civil society, as well as Mrs. Thelman, who lost over 24 members of her family in the Congo at the hands of members of the LRA. I commend your dedication and commitment to working on this issue and helping to seek an end to the senseless violence that it produces. I look forward to hearing your testimony on the latest developments in the search for Kony, as well as your insights into the devastation the LRA has wrought throughout Central Africa and what can be done to stop it. The Obama administration deployed close to 100 military advisors to Uganda in 2011 to help Ugandan and other military forces in the region seek out and capture Kony and members of the LRA. The U.S. has also provided significant logistical support to Uganda's counter-LRA operations beyond its borders since 2008, while U.S.-based advocacy groups have contributed to U.S. policymakers' interest in the issue, as well as public awareness among U.S. citizens. While it's reported, as the chairman mentioned, that the numerical strength of the LRA has dwindled to maybe as small as 200 fighters today, their intimate knowledge of the inhospitable Central African landscapes and total disregard for human life continues to make them a clear and present danger. Though it originated in northern Uganda, the LRA now operates across a broad range of remote border regions between the CAR, the DRC, South Sudan, and even Sudan, according to reports. I don't know if people saw the Washington Post article today. Mr. Chairman, did you mention that? And well, and there's also the concern as to maybe cooperation with Seleka, and maybe we'll hear about that today. Given the LRA's wide range of operations, I should also highlight the broad grouping of international bodies and actors involved in the effort to end the threat of this terrorist group. These include African governments, the UN, political missions, and peacekeeping operations, as well as the AU and the EU. In 2012, the AU launched a regional task force against the LRA, which is led by Uganda, though it hasn't reached its full authorized troop strength of 5,000. And this is the kind of collaboration that is necessary to deal and address the cross-border dimensions of the LRA activities. In closing, I'd like to encourage my colleagues in Congress and other U.S. government agencies to sustain our effort to rid Central Africa of Joseph Kony and to continue working with the international community to ensure that the LRA is no longer a threat to the innocent men, women, and helpless children it has preyed upon since its inception. I'm committed to joining you all in that effort and hope to learn from today's hearing how I can and we can be of greater assistance.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. I'd like to now introduce our three distinguished witnesses who are expert and also extraordinarily brave in the work that they have done, and thank them for their leadership and for informing our committee and, by extension, members of the full committee and the Congress by what you are able to convey to us past and especially today as an update. We'll begin with Mr. Paul Ronan, who is co-founder of the Resolve LRA Crisis Initiative and currently serves as the project director. He also co-manages the LRA Crisis Tracker, a project that provides analysis of trends in LRA violence and activity to policymakers, humanitarians, and affected communities. He travels frequently to Uganda and LRA-affected areas in the CAR, DR Congo, and South Sudan. He is also a frequent contributor to media outlets, congressional briefings, and think tank fora. Prior to co-founding the Resolve, he worked in the Caritas International and Franciscans International UN Advocacy offices in New York. We'll then hear from Mr. Sasha Lesnev, who is the Associate Director of Policy at the Enough Project, where he focuses on peace, conflict, and corporate responsibility issues in Central Africa. He is also founding director of the Grassroots Reconciliation Group, an organization that runs projects with former child soldiers in northern Uganda. He was based in Uganda for 2.5 years as senior program officer with the Northern Uganda Peace Initiative and advisor to the chief mediator of the peace process with the Lord's Resistance Army. He is author of the book, Crafting Peace, Strategies to Deal with Warlords in Collapsing States. And finally, we will hear from Ms. Francesca Mukabila Thielen, who was born and raised in Dungu territory in the DR Congo. She was founding teacher of Minzoto School. Though she moved away from the DR Congo in 1989, she travels to Dungu biannually. Because Francesca's family in the Dungu region has suffered profound losses of life during the LRA violence, her commitment to improving conditions in Dungu is strong and very personal. She founded the Friends of Minzoto in response to the dire conditions, extensive suffering, and pleas for help that she encountered in that region in 2010. She has made numerous public presentations on DRC history, culture, and the ongoing humanitarian crisis at universities, schools at every level, community and educational and church events. I'd like to begin with Mr. Ronan, and thank you again, all three, for being here.
So Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass, and members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for convening this timely discussion. I would like to express my deep gratitude for the bipartisan leadership that this subcommittee, Congress as a whole, has shown in support of efforts to stop atrocities by the Lord's Resistance Army, including the passage of the LRA Disarmament and Northern Uganda Recovery Act in May of 2010. I've been traveling to areas that have been affected by the LRA for 10 years now, and I've seen firsthand how the LRA Disarmament Act set into motion a significant strengthening of the U.S. government commitment to resolve the crisis, including the deployment of 100 U.S. military advisors. This support has greatly helped our African partners in the region to reduce the fighting capacity of the LRA by half from what it was in 2010, which was about 400. Kony now has fewer than 200 combatants left at his disposal, and this has greatly diminished the capacity of the LRA to commit atrocities. And as the graph up on the screen shows, kind of how the number of combatants has dropped. Killings by the LRA in Eastern Central African Republic, Northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and Western South Sudan have dropped dramatically from 776 in 2010 to just 13 in 2014. As encouraging as this progress has been, let there be no mistake, the LRA is not finished. Joseph Kony has outlasted 3 U.S. presidents already, and without renewed attention to this crisis, he will outlast both President Obama and the 114th Congress. His LRA forces have abducted over 400 Congolese civilians so far this year, which is more than they abducted in any of the previous four years. And this demonstrates clearly, I think, the danger that if U.S. and regional partners withdraw before removing Kony, the LRA could quickly rebuild and resume mass atrocities. The recent spike in attacks has also led to an increase in displacement and humanitarian needs, including in the areas where my colleague Francisca's family lives. And the next slide shows some of the trends there, including the uptick in abductions. Still, with less than 200 fighters remaining, the LRA is at its weakest point in more than 2 decades, and Congress can continue to play a galvanizing role in ending LRA atrocities for good. The resolve is supportive of House Resolution 394, introduced in July by a bipartisan coalition of 12 representatives. The resolution outlines steps the administration should take to reinforce the counter-LRA strategy, including adjusting its priorities to put more emphasis on promising defection campaigns. My recommendation is that within the next 6 months, the U.S. military double, literally, the saturation level and geographic scope of the defection messaging targeting the LRA. And as you can see from the next slide, which is a map, just how vast the area that the LRA is operating is. We also urge Congress to ensure that the administration is adequately preparing for a post-Kony world. The LRA has long preyed on the communities that are marginalized by their own governments and face threats from other armed groups, and these challenges will remain long after Kony is finally brought to justice. The sectarian conflicts that have left dozens killed or injured in Bangui and other areas of the Central African Republic over the past several days is a sobering reminder that the U.S. counter-LRA strategy must be part of a broader, long-term regional strategy that invests in strengthening fragile states and preventing mass atrocities. USAID has invested in several innovative early recovery and civilian protection programs in LRA-affected areas, but most communities have been severely underserved by the U.S. and other donors. Too often, programming in these areas has been underfunded, delayed, and hampered by a lack of proper coordination. For the U.S. counter-LRA strategy to truly bear lasting fruit, USAID should invest in programs that spur longer-term economic recovery, reinforce community cohesion, and holistically reintegrate those who escape from the LRA. In particular, I would like to reiterate that last point. I have interviewed dozens of men, women, and children who have risked rugged terrain, starvation, and Kony's wrath to escape the LRA. Most were abducted as kids, and each of their courageous attempts to reunite with their families is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Still, many struggle to overcome the poverty, the medical problems, and the mental trauma inflicted by years in Kony's captivity. Helping those brave souls to reintegrate into their communities is equally, if not more important, than finally bringing Kony to justice. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so very much for that excellent testimony. And without objection, your full statement, which had even more data and information, that will be made a part of the record, as well as for all of our other witnesses. We'll now go to Mr. Lesnev.
Thank you so much. As someone who spent the last 12 years interviewing and running projects for former LRA combatants, I really deeply appreciate your attention and continued vigilance on this very important issue. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass, and Mr. Meadows and other members of this subcommittee, and I really appreciate and thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important issue right at this critical juncture in the fight against the LRA. From my years of working on the LRA, both with the Enough Project and in running projects for hundreds of former ex-combatants with the Grassroots Reconciliation Group, I've observed that the LRA is, frankly, one of the most resilient rebel groups on the planet in the face of adversity. It would win any survivor competition. Today, I am deeply concerned about the LRA's new trade in ivory and other commodities and its ability to regenerate itself going forward. Strong bipartisan support in Congress to end the LRA's brutality has made a major impact, as Paul noted and as you noted in your opening statements, in improving human security and preventing atrocities in this war-torn region. Congress's LRA Disarmament Northern Uganda Recovery Act, as well as the Obama administration's deployment of U.S. military advisors to the African Union forces in 2011, have helped lead to a 90% decrease in LRA killings and a 30% decrease in attacks, and have decimated its leadership. When I started working in northern Uganda, over 1.8 million people were displaced, 90% of the population. Today, that number is down to 200,000. That's almost a 90% decrease, which is a huge impact on people's lives in that region. But I'm here to talk about how the LRA is not yet down and out. And with a new trade in ivory, gold, and diamonds, it could make, in fact, a serious comeback, as it has done several times in the past. Today, the LRA is increasingly poaching elephants for valuable tusks, trading that ivory for ammunition, supplies, and food in Sudan with the likely complicity of the Sudanese government. This is actually the subject of last month's National Geographic magazine, where explorer Brian Christie manufactured a fake ivory tusk and tracked it from LRA-held areas in Congo through to Sudan. Critically, the LRA has a safe haven in Sudan-controlled territory, Kafia Kingi. Joseph Kony has rarely left that area since 2011, and that is the chief area where the LRA trades ivory. Our team at Enough just spent a month in this area tracking the ivory trade and worked with a satellite company, Digital Globe, to help predict where the poaching might happen next. And here's what we found. So first of all, the elephants in Garamba National Park in Congo, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, are rapidly decreasing as a result of the poaching. From 20,000 elephants in the 1980s, there are fewer than 1,800 today. And this is a worrying, more global trend, with an estimated 35,000 elephants killed per year for tusks. The LRA is one of the key armed groups responsible for poaching elephants in this area, along with Sudanese and South Sudanese poachers. There's one unit of LRA fighters that's permanently stationed in Garamba National Park under direct orders from Kony, and also under direct orders from Kony, including leadership from one of his sons. A second LRA unit then takes those ivory tusks to Sudan-controlled territories to trade them near a Sudan Armed Forces garrison in a place called Dafak, also in Kafia Kingi. The main ivory trading town is called Songo. Sudanese forces have reportedly also provided valuable intelligence to the LRA, warning them of pending attacks. The ivory is then traded on by truck to Niala, the capital of South Darfur in Sudan, and then likely to Khartoum for export in Asia. Garamba National Park rangers say that if the LRA and other poaches are not stopped, the entire elephant population of that area could be wiped out. Along with ivory, the LRA is also starting to trade in diamonds and gold. These resources give the LRA the ability to regroup and rearm. Looting and then trading in these items allows the LRA the opportunity to acquire food, ammunition, and other supplies. And over the past several months, LRA defectors that we've interviewed have come out with large amounts of fresh ammunition, along with rocket-propelled grenades. You can trade up to one tusk. You can trade one tusk for up to 25 boxes of bullets, and there are over 700 bullets in one box. It only takes one bullet to kill an elephant. This is critically important because the LRA already has weapons, both with its fighters and more guns buried in the ground acquired from Sudan and from looting. So all it needs now are bullets, supplies, and Joseph Kony. Kony is still in command and is central to the group, despite the group's leadership decimation. With him in charge and with new ammunition, the LRA can abduct new fighters. And although overall LRA attacks are down significantly, as Paul pointed out, abduction numbers are up this year. Now is the time to double down on the U.S. counter-LRA mission and help end the LRA's horrific reign of atrocities against civilians once and for all. This can be done with a low-cost investment in a few key areas. First, the Obama administration should reauthorize the U.S. advisors beyond October, the U.S. military advisors, with the primary goal of bringing Joseph Kony to justice. Simply managing or containing the problem will not stop Kony. The U.S. mission should also provide additional airlift capacity to the AU forces and increase its efforts to get LRA fighters to defect from the group. I second Paul's recommendation on that. To that end, I urge you to sign on to House Resolution 394 on the LRA, a bipartisan resolution introduced by Representatives Jim McGovern and Joe Pitts. Second, the United States should take a leading role in addressing Sudan's complicity in aiding the LRA. Sudan again denies that they are sheltering the LRA despite a wealth of evidence. I attach that evidence compiled from the Enough Project, Resolve, and Invisible Children for the record with your permission.
It'll be part.
Thank you. The United States should deploy advisors close to the areas controlled by Sudan in Kafia Kingi so that it can gather precise intelligence on Kony's whereabouts. Third, The United States should help shut down this blood ivory trade. To boost efforts on the ground, Congress should increase assistance to the Fish and Wildlife Service for anti-poaching work in Central Africa, for which it has experience. And the U.S. advisors on the counter-LRA mission should work more closely with the park rangers and help interdict the trade from Congo to Sudan, which is now a known route, when you can go on the National Geographic website and find that exact route. More broadly, the Obama administration's draft rules to help ban the ivory trade are an excellent step in the right direction, but they should also include only a small de minimis provision for ivory sales, similar to what the state of New York has on the books for ivory laws. I commend the many members of this subcommittee, including yourselves, for signing on to the Global Anti-Poaching Act, H.R. 2494, introduced by Chairman Ed Royce and Ranking Member Elliot Engel, and I urge other members of the subcommittee to do the same. Finally, in the FY16 appropriations process, Congress should not forget about the LRA and should continue to robustly support the counter-LRA operations. The U.S. government deserves tremendous credit for sapping Kony's LRA of most of its strength and helping allow 1.6 million people to go home. However, the LRA has a history of regrouping, and we should not forget that. And so I am deeply concerned that its trade in ivory and other commodities could allow it to do so again. Now is not the time to pull the plug, but instead to finish the job and bring Kony to justice. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liston, for your testimony. I'd like to now ask Ms. Thelen if she would proceed.
My name is Francisca Thelen. I want to sincerely thank the chairman, ranking member, and the entire subcommittee for this opportunity to speak today on behalf of those suffering from the violence of the LRA resistant army. Though I have lived in the United States for 26 years, and am a U.S. citizen, I grew up in the Dungu territory in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a region deeply affected by the violence of Joseph Kony and the LRA. I am the founder of a small nonprofit called Friend of Minzoto, which support local community efforts in the Dungu area to recover from the LRA violence. My dear friend Lisa Shannon authored a book entitled Mama Coco and the 100 Gunmen, which tells my family's story of experiencing the LRA crisis firsthand. Since 2008, 28 members of my family have been murdered by the LRA. Most were chopped with the machete, many in front of their loved ones. 6 children in my family were abducted and forced to become LRA's sex slaves or child soldiers. Although one veteran escaped, he came home so psychologically damaged that he is a danger to our other children and cannot live at home. We can only assume that the others who have not returned home have died. At the age of 69, my mother spent months at a time hiding in a bush with no blanket or supplies, taking care of multiple babies and teenagers, and getting sick with pneumonia before coming back home to nothing. The LRA have looted everything. For 5 years, my family and every family in the Dungu territory lived in total terror because of the LRA, unable to go to the field to grow their crops. Everyone was hungry. Many who did not die at hand of the LRA died of starvation and malnutrition. Even now, the situation is not fully back to normal. Thousands of internally displaced families that took refuge in Dungu years ago still live there, with no land on their own, barely surviving day to day. Many of them live in meager homes next to the river, the only place where they could settle, and they are regularly flooded out of their homes when the rains come. Life for them is so difficult, but they are afraid to go home to their villages, and with good reason. Many of those who did go back to their villages were killed, or many are still being forced to give all their crops and belonging to the LRA when they attack. When I was in Dungu in 2010, interviewing survivors of the LRA, I would ask them, what do you want from the US government? The answers were always the same. We want peace. We want Kony out. I promised to share the message with my government in the United States, but I wasn't sure exactly how I would do that. Today, I'm finally able to deliver on that promise. I am very grateful for this opportunity. So, I'm here today to ask you, honorable members, in the strongest possible terms, to continue to support the African Union and the US advisor in the effort to end LRA violence. Please, do not allow this mission to lose strength until the LRA is stopped and Joseph Kony and his leaders have been held accountable for their horrific crimes. Why is continued support from the US so important when the LRA threat seems diminished? LRA attacks are still taking place. Particularly in Congo, abductions by the LRA have increased over the past year, which further traumatizes the population. In the minds of the communities, the LRA ruled the bush, but the bush is our bank. It's where we find food, where we clear land to cultivate our crops in order to feed our families and to earn livelihood. I have a story after story of my connection to people attacked by the LRA, but it would take days to tell them all, and they are very painful to share. As I close, I want to emphasize that these communities targeted by the LRA are severely neglected. They do not have resources on their own to get rid of LRA, and they have suffered long enough. The commitment of the US is critical to their survival and to lasting peace. Please, do not give up before the crisis is actually over. I am speaking for all Congolese enduring LRA violence when I thank you for all that the US government has already done to help bring this crisis to an end. In light of how far we have come and how precious these lives are, I urge you and every member of Congress to stay committed to seeing LRA violence finally ended. Specifically, I ask you to support House Resolution 394, which reinforces the US government's commitment to ending LRA violence. Secondly, I urge you to provide funding in the US budget that will support local recovery initiatives in LRA-affected communities. And lastly, I ask you to use your position of influence to press Congo's government to promote free and fair election on time. I ask you to use your help to make sure that the communities like Dungu do not continue to be so marginalized and vulnerable to groups like LRA in the future. I want to thank you again for your care for families like my own who have suffered from this crisis, and thank you for this opportunity to fulfill my promise to them and represent their voices here in Washington. Thank you.
Ms. Dillon, thank you so very much for your testimony. We do have 2 votes on the floor, but we don't have to be there just yet, although in a moment or so. But we will take a brief recess and then come back. I'd like to ask just a couple of opening questions. Ms. Dillon, your nonprofit supports recovery efforts, obviously, for the victims of the LRA. What are the greatest needs? Are individuals, especially children and women, getting the psychological help that they need after being traumatized? Is the faith community stepping up, whether it be Christian or Muslim, to meet those needs, in your opinion?
Actually, I cannot really tell you that there's something happening to help them now. Back, it was in 2010 when I was there, there was a group helping them, and it seems like they're struggling now with funding. They don't have money to continue, but there's nothing really at present.
Oh, I appreciate it. Would either of our other witnesses like to comment on the psychological component of helping those who have been traumatized? Yes, Mr. Ronan.
And I appreciate that is a great question, and I think that the answer is that very little support is now available to the people that escape the LRA. Many of them might receive maybe a few days when they first come out of some basic some medical treatment or some counseling, but over the long term, the children and the women and especially the adult men who do escape, all of whom were abducted as kids, receive very little support, and that is, I think, a problem that will be manifested and will continue for years in the future if these people are not able to properly reintegrate into their communities.
Thank you.
I would just
Mr.
add, if I may, the scars of war of being a child soldier don't disappear overnight, and unfortunately, many NGOs and organizations have pulled out of northern Uganda because there's no longer active conflict happening there. And that's an area of tremendous need. The organization that I helped found, the Grassroots Reconciliation Group, runs a psychosocial trauma counseling project for roughly 700 ex-combatants and their families, but it's really a drop in the bucket when you think that the LRA has abducted some 66,000 youth, and if you've spent 5 or 10 or 15 years in the bush, constantly being forced to kill your friends and your family members, those psychological traumas will not go away overnight. So there's a lot more need for assistance in that area, and our groups are putting together a letter exactly on this issue now. We'll be happy to send it to you.
Okay. Let me just ask you, Mr. Lesnev, you make a very ominous warning that it could make a serious comeback as it has done in the past. And that, my opening comments, I tried to emphasize that, and I know Ranking Member Bass feels the same way. Is there any belief or any expectation that the administration will not continue this vital program, again, which all three of you have wholeheartedly embraced and endorsed?
I think that there's still a debate happening within the administration between those who really want to see the job finished and those who say, well, the leadership is decimated, attacks are down, the capacity is lowered, let's just contain the problem so that, and move on to other priority areas.
Is it because of cost? I mean, what's the reason?
I think part of it is cost, part of it is the growing crises in South Sudan and CAR, other priority areas. But from our experience, as long as Kony is there, he's very skillful at getting new resources and surviving and moving to territories where he has a safe haven. So as long as he's there, we need to continue working.
The committee will stand in brief recess subject to the call of the chair. And I thank you and sorry for this delay. The subcommittee will resume its sitting, and again, I apologize for that delay. Just a few additional questions, and I know Karen is on her way back, as well as Mark Meadows. Mr. Ronan, in your testimony, you talked about the Come Home Defection campaign and how important that is. You make a point that I found very interesting. You talked about how some of the people, defectors, had walked for an entire month to reach the U.S. military base in eastern CAR. And I'm wondering, is it because it is that dangerous to go anywhere else other than to the U.S. forces? And how is it that they knew where they were? I mean, is the information network sufficiently? I mean, a month of walking can take you many hundreds of miles, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, and thank you very much. That's again a very good question, and I think that first of all, it's just important to reiterate the ability that Kony has to instill propaganda into the combatants in his force, which he has an advantage of course, because many of them were abducted when they were very young. So the starting point to try to convince these combatants to defect from the LRA is very difficult. It's very difficult to do that. So I really do think it is a testament to the ingenuity and the hard work of the U.S. advisors and the civil society partners that they work with. That they've been able to devise messaging, whether it be by FM radio, by speakers that are strapped onto helicopters, or by leaflets to really penetrate the propaganda that Kony tries to instill. And this most recent case from a few months ago, when these 7 bodyguards to Kony, who were operating near the Sudanese-controlled areas of the Kafia-Kingi enclave with Kony. When I interviewed them after they had defected, they said that it was a result of this messaging that they had received that has been supported by the U.S. military, that they knew that they could safely defect to where the U.S. base was, and they knew where the U.S. base was as a result of that messaging. So for me, you know, to talk to these guys who had been abducted 15 years ago when they were very, very young, and hear them talk about how the U.S. base was in many ways kind of a beacon for them, that they were trying to reach, and then they did reach there, and they were received and were able to return to their families, you know, again, was just a powerful reminder that these defection campaigns can really have a positive impact.
Let me just ask you, all of you, if you'd like to speak to it, but you have testified that the U.S. government has not dedicated the appropriate mix of flexible, context-appropriate intelligence and airlift capabilities to pursue the LRA. And given the heavily forested areas in which they operate, why do you think this strategy has developed, and what impact has it had on the success of the counter-LRA program? And I just note, parenthetically, that, you know, in Vietnam, there was the defoliate Agent Orange. Obviously, it caused many of our service members and Vietnamese to become very, very sick. I used to chair the Veterans Affairs Committee, and the number of illnesses attributable to that are huge. But since then, we have developed, and I've been to military bases where this technology is being deployed and actually affixed to helicopters. The look-down capability is enormous for the U.S. military. Are we using that kind of capability? I mean, the ability to see through foliage is enormous, and I'm wondering if that's being deployed as far as you know.
I would say that again, you know, to recognize the challenges that the U.S. advisors in the field are dealing with. The LRA is now really composed of 200 combatants that are spread over an area the size of California. So, you know, don't want to underestimate how difficult it is to find them in this area. At the same time, I do think that the U.S. could do a better job of ensuring that the helicopters and the ISR assets that are deployed out to these regions are appropriate to where, to how the LRA operates, and I think that's why it's very important that the U.S. continue to try to make sure that these assets are and personnel are deployed in areas near the Kafiakingi enclave and where Kony himself is operating. And as far as the specific technology that is being used now, unfortunately, I don't know exactly what that is. I don't have access to that. But I would say that we've seen a very positive trend in what the advisors have been doing over the past year or so of really trying to talk to as many people as they can and to develop human intelligence, because the LRA is interacting with many people in these areas, whether they're trying to sell ivory or acquire food, and that intelligence has led to actionable operations in the past that have been very successful. So that is a alternative approach that I think can be very useful.
Thank you.
I would just also add that I think that the location issue that Paul highlighted is very important, because for a while the U.S. advisors were deployed in an area of southeastern CAR that was pretty far away, frankly, from a lot of the LRA operating areas, so Kafiakingi and northeastern Congo. We are learning that the U.S. advisors are moving closer to the LRA areas of operation now, which is good. That's something we've been advocating for, frankly, and it's difficult to operate in those areas. I mean, these are areas with no roads at all. It takes quite a bit of capacity from airlift to actually get there. I think that the defection issue and location of defection areas is another important consideration that the U.S. advisors and the U.S. The Obama administration could put some more effort into, in terms of providing some more of these locations for LRA fighters to defect. Right? They shouldn't have to walk for 400 miles to get there, because that really is the safest area. There have been LRA members who have been lynched in certain areas as communities are afraid of the fighters. So I think there could be some more efforts there, particularly, I don't know if there's a map available, but most of the attacks are happening now in northeastern Congo, so there's a need there in particular.
Ms. Thielen, you've said that the communities now feel that the LRA rule the bush, and I'm wondering how this has impacted the location or the relocation of villagers. Are people combining settlements or moving to what they perceived are safer zones? Could you put your microphone on, please? Thank you, ma'am.
In general, people who are in a town of Dungu, they are safer than people who live in the villages, because LRA have changed their strategies now. They come kind of publicly by the side road and they captured people. And then we hold the two back. If they capture 4 of them, then we hold the 2 and they give the 2 others money, send them to the market to buy food for them and bring it to the bush in order to release all the group. And they give them ultimatum: go to the market, buy food, bring it to us, and we will release all of you, or we will kill all of you now. So, and they do as they're told, and they go buy food, they bring it. When they bring it, then they will release them. So they don't live far from the road now. They're not scared. And I think they're playing game in mind just the way they started at the beginning. They were in the market. People were thinking, oh, they're nice. They're just looking for a place to settle, and they're not bothering us. And then the attack started. And now the fear is like they are getting very strong and powerful. They have money. They have everything. According to people who escaped them, it was in July when my brother, who works for the early warning radio system, so his group went to this village. So he was sick that day, didn't go with them, but that group was captured by the LRA. and then they halted, two of them sent two to the market to Dungu. So they came and they noticed the authorities that of what was happening. He said, okay, the group was captured by the LRA, they sent us to the market, we're buying food, we're taking it back to them, so in order to release the rest of the group who were there. And then they took the food back. So when they were there, they see that the LRA have everything. They have a solar panel, they have a radio, they have machine guns, they have enough of food, a lot of money. And they released them after 2 days, and they come home. Right? So now it's that the fear is like the one, pretty soon the attack will start again.
Let me, we've all read this morning's front page Washington Post story, and I'm just wondering if you might want to comment. A very provocative headline. U.S. troops have turned to some unsavory partners to help find warlord Joseph Kony. And the article talks how U.S. forces have begun working closely with Muslim rebels known as Salika, who toppled the central government 2 years ago, and then it goes on. One official described the group as the mafia. And yet, as you read on, the answer from National Security Council Peter Bogard is that U.S. forces do not provide intelligence or operational assistance to Salika factions and other armed groups, though we acknowledge that our military advisors may meet with actors who have information on LRA activities. I'd appreciate your comments on the article, because I know you've all read it. The $5 million that have been offered by state, has there been any takers or anything close to someone providing actionable information about what could be done? And again, if I could again circle back to your testimony, Mr. Ronan, when you said that 417 Congolese civilians so far this year have been abducted, more than they abducted in any of the previous 4 years, as if there might be a shift in their modus operandi. What happens to those abductees? And then the 200 that we keep talking about that are still Kony's killers, who are they? Are they child soldiers now grown up? Are they, I mean, if you could give us a sense, a profile of who we think they are at least, it would be very helpful, all three of you.
I'll just start off with the first question. You ask a lot of questions at the same time, Mr. Smith, but that's perfectly fine. So with regard to the Salika Washington Post article, quite frankly, I think this is very misleading. You know, first of all, the U.S. forces need to be operating and in that area, which is close to where Kony is located. You know, and clearly they need to communicate with any authorities or forces in that area. Former Salika commanders, Salika is no longer an active force itself. There are former Salika commanders who are in control of that area. This is not an Islamist, a jihadist group. They're not establishing Sharia law or anything like that. They've been in control of that area for roughly 10 years. So if anyone wants to move in and out of that area, they of course have to communicate to them. We have talked to our folks on the ground in that area. We do not have any knowledge that the U.S. has provided any financial assistance to the Salika. We would obviously strongly condemn if the U.S. providing any assistance, financial assistance to those rebels, but we do not have any information. So, and again, we think it's very important for the U.S. to be present in areas close to where Kony is. Otherwise, we'll continue circling around here for another decade with this mission.
I would just like to reiterate everything from what Sasha just said. You know, I think that the Washington Post article did outline in some of the challenges that U.S. forces in the region face, but an Islamist group that they are partnering with is not one of them. You know, I think that the terminology that was used there was just inaccurate. You know, as has been said, what the U.S. troops are doing they are talking to people who have knowledge about where Kony and his fighters may be. They are not doing that in exchange for material support or for doing joint operations or anything like that. And as I said before, I think that the human intelligence piece of this operation is something that we should be praising and not something that we should be overly concerned about in the way that was represented in that article. When it comes, the one thing that I will add on to that is I do think that it is important for the State Department and the U.S. to clarify that whatever conversations are happening between the U.S. military and these former Seleka to make sure that those conversations are being coordinated with the response to the broader conflict in the CAR, which as we've noted has gotten much worse in the past few days. Again, we can't see the LRA as in a vacuum. It is very much interconnected with what is happening in the broader region. The question of the patterns of LRA abductions in the DRC, in Congo. Fortunately, what we have seen over the past few years is with the pressure that the U.S. and Ugandan troops are putting on the LRA, Kony doesn't really have the capacity to do the mass child abductions and train them to join the LRA. We've seen a few cases of that, but a vast majority of the people that have been abducted over the past few years are adults who are used to carry goods from their community into the bush for the use of the LRA, and then they are released. Now, I don't want to understate, or say that that's not important. Even being abducted for a few days is very traumatic, and the people in these areas often have very not very many goods. So if you take their farming tools and their harvest and their seeds, then that can be really a terrible thing. And as far as the 200 combatants left within the LRA, most of them, over 100, are Ugandans who were abducted as kids and are now adults. So they have really kind of grown up within the LRA. And then maybe another 30 to 50 of them would be Congolese, South Sudanese, or Central Africans who have been abducted in the past 4 or 5 years and maybe a bit younger.
The U.S. Armed Services that are deployed there, have there been any injuries, fatalities, years to date?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I have other questions, but I'll yield to my good friend, Ms. Bass, and then come back.
Thank you. Once again, thank you all for your testimony and taking the time out today to speak with us. I wanted to ask several questions. I wanted to follow up on a question that the chairman asked that I don't think you guys responded to, and that is the $5 million. So I wanted to know, first of all, earlier this year, one of the LRA commanders was surrendered, captured, a little bit of difference there in terms of how people view it. What happened? Because if he surrendered or was captured, did anybody contribute to that? Is the $5 million still there? And why isn't, I mean, that's such a huge amount of money. It's hard for me to understand why that isn't enough to generate his capture.
Yeah. So as far as Dominic Ongwen, who was senior LRA commander, indicted by the ICC in 2005, and in late 2014, Kony basically put him under arrest within the LRA and indicated that he was going to kill him. So Dominic Ongwen, with the help of some other fighters within the LRA, was able to escape. And then, as you said, kind of the sequence of events after that is a bit fuzzy about whether he was captured or whether he surrendered. He was certainly trying to surrender, and he came into the custody of some former Seleka, and who got in touch with the U.S. military in the town of Obo, and it's unclear if these former Seleka were even aware of who he was and the reward that they may have been eligible for, but they transferred him to the custody of the U.S. military. He was then taken to The Hague. So, you know, again, to our knowledge, the $5 million has you know, no part of that has been dispersed for Dominic's arrest or his capture. One of the challenges that I think that we've seen talking to the U.S. military as they've tried to implement this this plan is that many people in the region don't believe it, and it's not because the 5 million is too little. It's because that's such a huge number that many people simply think that it's a trick. So, you know, I think that there's a learning process that needs to happen, you know, about how to advertise this in a way that will incentivize people to contribute.
I can actually understand that. Ms. Thalen, could you respond to that question? I mean, if 5 million is so much that it seems a trick, and I could kind of understand that because it sounds like trillions. Should it be done differently? So your thoughts, too, on two things. One, why that hasn't delivered, Kony. And then two, in response to what Mr. Ronan was saying, does it need to be done differently? Is it a smaller amount? Outreach, how's it done?
Thank you for your question, but that is not in my expertise.
Oh, no. Well, but I'm asking you that from the perspective of you being from the area and given your past and, you know, continued relationship with the people, the culture, the community, the ties. That's why I'm asking it.
So, first of all, I didn't know anything about the money.
You didn't know about the $5 million?
I didn't know about the money.
Oh, boy.
And the second ball, people are really thankful for, like when the African Union troop got there, they were so happy. And with the U.S. advisors, and the things were going very good. And the people actually start staying outside, and they feel like there's life coming back. But they still wonder why it's taking too long to capture Kony. While, you know, you've done all these things, the U.S. advisors are there, the African troops are there, but in the town of Dungu itself, life is okay, but it's overpopulated because everybody in the villages moved into the town who used to be only for 20,000 people. But now I don't know the number, but I can feel like, you know, the roads are packed. They're just thinking that it's taking too long to capture Kony.
Well, that's pretty dramatic for me to hear that you were not aware of it, considering you're active in the area. So maybe there's something that needs to be examined in terms of how we're getting the word out there. I wonder, Mr. Lesniff, did I say that right?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so what happens the day after we capture Kony? You know, I worry sometimes that our focus, and obviously I would like to see him captured, but, you know, with Boko Haram, with Al-Qaeda, with the Taliban, I mean, we've captured leaders before, only to have them replaced the next day. So given that the LRA has, you know, really been reduced in size, do we know anything about intelligence, second-line leadership? What would happen the day after we captured Kony?
It's a great question. I think it's one that we've all been debating and talking about for several years. You know, frankly, the rest of the LRA's leadership is very much decimated according to what it used to be. There were several commanders who were there from the late 80s and early 90s. They've all either been killed or defected or awaiting trial in The Hague. The ones who are rising up in the leadership now are Kony's sons, who are young, you know, 21, 23, 24. They are not, I do not think they have the capacity to lead this type of rebellion. I've spoken to so many ex-combatants who speak about Kony's ability and spiritual powers, and that's why they follow him. And they believe those spiritual powers, and he has, of course, you know, manipulated his control of information so that he knows when something is going to happen, and so that will appear to someone locally as as him having powers. But in terms of what would happen after we would capture or kill Kony, you know, I think that there would probably be a couple of LRA groups who would try to operate local areas, but if they knew that Kony was not there, backing them up, giving them orders, resupplying them with arms, ammunition, food, medicine, et cetera, you know, they would, the defections would increase pretty dramatically. I don't think that the U.S. should give up then, that should be the end of our program. I think that, you know, there needs to be programs, recovery programs, rehabilitation programs, psychological programs like we talked about earlier, which are very important to help rebuild those areas. We're trying to get a specific road funded out in that area, which it really hamstrings you know, movement throughout that whole region.
Who are you
So
trying to
so
get to
that,
do that?
yeah. I would want to say one other thing with regard to $5 million.
No,
okay?
who are you trying to get to fund the road?
Well, we're the UN, African Union,
But go ahead.
World Bank, yeah.
The 5 million?
With the 5 million, yeah. I mean, so one interesting thing that we uncovered in our new interviews with ex-combatants is that for the first time that we, in our lifetime of working on the LRA, there's been a serious attempt on Joseph Kony's life. That his bodyguards actually tried to kill him. They failed, and so therefore they ran very quickly away. But you know, that speaks to some of the pressure, and you know, it's really too bad that many local communities are not aware of this 5 million reward, and so we obviously need to do a much better job at communicating that, and I think also communicate it in local terms. But several of the military folks and LRA, they are aware of it. And also I think that helps Kony stick in an area that is pretty depopulated. There's, of course, a possibility, and many rumors circulating, that he would go to South Darfur, which would be further in Sudanese territory, et cetera. The fact that he's not moving in there, I think, is largely a result of this $5 million, because people are more aware there, and they, you know, they would like to get that money. And that's a much more populated area.
Did the bodyguards escape? You said they ran away. Did they escape?
They defected, yeah.
They did?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if there's any effort to involve them in the search for him?
Absolutely, yeah. You want to talk more to that?
Yeah, just to add that these same defectors that tried to kill Kony were the ones that I was talking about before. When they did escape, they made a beeline for the U.S. base, because they knew that was a place where they could safely go. And as a result of intelligence that they gave to the U.S. and the Ugandan troops, there was an arms cache and some food stores that was destroyed on the Central African side of the border with Sudan.
You know, you mentioned at the beginning, I'm not sure which one, it might have been you, Mr. Roman, about the gold and diamonds, I think. Where is that coming from? Is that coming from the DRC, or how are they lined up to get that? I understand the poaching, that's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly looting in the Central African Republic. That area is pretty well known for its gold and diamond mines. Of course, Carr diamonds are some of the most famous in the world for their quality. You know, the defectors that we interviewed talked about Kony having jars of gold nuggets and sort of a half-liter bottle of diamonds waiting to sell for the right time. There were some rumors that he was going to buy anti-personnel landmines to sort of encircle him so that no one could attack his positions. That, of course, doesn't work very well if you have helicopters and so forth. But anyways, so yeah, it's mostly looting and from artisanal mining. They have not set up, as far as we know, sort of, you know, more complex conflict minerals type of operations where they actually operate mines. Not yet.
Thank you. And Ms. Thalen, you might have mentioned this earlier before I returned, but could you talk about your organization, the work your organization does, and then do you receive any support from the U.S. government?
Well, it's my organization is very small. I can call it this a baby organization. So I got my 501c3 in December 14, and it's basically I start working at school. I give them nice clean water. We dig up a well and put a pump. And then now we are in the process of building $10 latrines and hand washing stations. And also, I have big ambitions, but I don't know where the money will come from, but it will.
It's okay. What are the ambitions? You know, ambitions first, money second.
So, so I want to help the because to have a good community, that means a healthy community. So if we want to be really good, like we need strong people, good health. So they need clean water, and I have to build some 60 more wells and build latrine. Now they don't have a public latrine, and we have many people, and it's really not good. The sanitation is not good. And also, I need like some kind of equipment for the hospital. We have a big hospital, it's a kind of regional hospital. But the only thing, when I visited this January, the only equipment was there was a 60-year-old microscope and a refrigerator with vaccines. So people with broken legs and all kind of critical condition, they take the bus and go on this nice nightmarish road, dusty road, to Goma or to Bunia to get the treatment. They don't have X-ray, MRI, or any kind of sort. So, and that is this my ambition. So this summer, I made some Congolese food and some barbecue in my backyard to raise money for for latrine, and I did well. I think I did a little over 10,000.
That's great.
Some good people of goodwill helped me. They were this compassionate about my speech and what my community is going through, and they helped, and now the latrine is in the process.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bass. Let me just ask you, Mr. Lesnev, you reminded us of the terrible toll that the LRA has imposed upon innocent people, the abduction of more than 66,000 children, 100,000 deaths over the past 28 years, and then you talked about the displaced, down from 1.8 million to 200,000 today. 200,000 is an enormous number of people displaced, and I'm wondering if you could tell us, maybe break that out a little bit further, who they are, where they are, how they are faring, and the prospects, if there are any, on the near term, intermediate term, for return. And then you also, in talking about the blood ivory trade, point out that, and I thought this was amazing, sadly, tragic, that you can trade one tusk from an elephant for up to 25 boxes of bullets, and there are over 700 bullets in a box. That comes out to 17,500. That is a lot of ammo, and you've talked about how Kony seems to have more resources, like more ammo recently. Who is buying the ivory, and how much of that clientele might be Americans?
I will answer the ivory question first, and I'll defer to Paul on the displacement figures. With regard to the ivory, we are heavily investigating that. It is pretty difficult to access the Kafia-Kingi area because it's controlled by Sudan, and they don't like to allow visas for people like us on the panel to access that area. But nevertheless, we are doing our best to investigate it, and particularly with LRA defectors who were involved in the ivory trade. I interviewed one of the big LRA ivory traders a few months ago. There are a couple of buyers that are based in Sudan. You know, there's some merchants in this town called Songo. We were told that there's some Sudan Armed Forces commanders who were also buying the ivory. They obviously have the bullets. The LRA is also needing food and medical supplies and so forth, so the local merchants will supply those. And then it mainly gets traded to Asia. So, there's a lot more effort needed in terms of helping law enforcement, inspect ports, and that trade is likely going from Port Sudan on to places like Dubai and then onward to China. And so there's a need to help the Customs and Border Patrol and law enforcement in those areas to intercept those containers. Frankly, right now it's pretty difficult to identify which containers they are, but we started a new initiative at NF called the Sentry, and the Sentry is really conducting these investigations into the financing of conflict. So we hope to come with new information about this, about which containers need to be intercepted and which traders need to be sanctioned.
And on the issue of displacement, I want to thank you actually for how you framed that, because I think many times people say, oh, there's been a drop from 1.8 million to 200,000, and that's not very many. And you're absolutely right to point out that that's an enormous amount of people. And in fact, a vast majority of them are Congolese and live right in the areas near where Francisca is from. And I would also like to say that there are some analysts that actually think that 200,000 number is quite a bit higher. Just to reiterate that the reason why many people are displaced, even if the number of attacks has gone down, is because the memory of the massacres that the LRA did in 2008, 8, 9, and 10, they are never going to leave the memories of the people that had to witness them. So even if the LRA is not as violent as it once was, the legacy that they have really has a ripple effect that will keep people displaced as long as Kony is free. I would also like to point out that in these same areas where a majority of displaced people live in Congo are, due to a drop in funding from the donor community, there has been a withdrawal of 16 of the 19 international humanitarian groups that had been providing much needed food, water, like sanitation. Many of the groups that were operational there have had to withdraw, and it's not because there's a decrease in the number of people that need the services. And of course, I've seen myself the incredible work that the Congolese themselves are doing in trying to address these needs, but there is a need for renewed international funding as well.
The African Union forces that are being advised by the 100 Americans deployed there, could you maybe give us some insights that might be unique to your experiences about who they are, how well they're doing, how many are there? What kind of capabilities do they have, like airlift, or is that all ours? I'm just wondering, how robust of an effort is that by the AU?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the question of the AURTF, and the troops that are deployed out there, again, want to recognize the bravery of many of those soldiers who are often not very well equipped and are tasked with walking through some dangerous jungles in order to find dangerous people. Now that said, it is unfortunate that I have to report that none of the countries that have dedicated troops to the AU force to track the LRA have been able to fulfill the obligations that they signed up for. And this again brings back the issue of regional instability, where in South Sudan and in Central African Republic we have seen massive problems that have prevented those governments.
How far short have they been?
I believe that the Ugandan army has come the closest. They have around 1,000 troops, I believe, is the number that they said that they have dedicated, which is about half of what they were committed for. And the Ugandan troops are really doing the bulk of these operations. They are the ones that we can largely attribute the decrease in the number of combatants to. The South Sudanese and the Central Africans really have hundreds, if not dozens, of troops that they've been able to dedicate, which is far, far lower than what they had said. There has been a ray of hope, I think, with the U.S. advisors working with a very small number of Congolese troops that have been doing kind of operations in and around Garamba Park, which is where the LRA gets much of its ivory. So hasn't provided much success yet, but I think it's a positive step.
I just ask you, should the administration phase out or terminate the U.S. deployment, what impact would that have on the Ugandese and Ugandans and others in terms of their commitment to troops?
It would have a devastating and debilitating impact. Paul and I were witness to the solely Ugandan-led operations for many years in northern Uganda and further. And frankly, although overall over many years it was sort of a war of attrition and LRA numbers slowly went down, there were so many botched operations. Many times when the Ugandans supposedly wouldn't have the fuel for a helicopter to go and chase Kony. A third of the Ugandan army was listed as ghost soldiers during that time. So the intelligence collection, the efforts to pursue Kony, the decimation of their leadership, again, 4 of the 5 top commanders are no longer in action, those are results of successful operations that the U.S. has helped really coordinate and really improve the capacity. So if the U.S. advisors were to go away, I think we would definitely see a resurgence in the LRA.
Very timely caution, and we will convey that to the administration immediately and take your words, if you don't mind, backed up by our observations. I'm sure Karen and I and others on the committee will want to put into a letter immediately that kind of caution, because that would be devastating. As you said, it would come back. I'd like to yield to Sheila Jackson-Lee, gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, forgive me for rushing in and rushing out. I want to thank you for your courtesies. I'm not a member of the committee, and you've always extended to me a courtesy. Forgive me, the loud phone that was ringing was calling me to the floor, so I apologize. I want to thank Ms. Bass as well for always being gracious. This is a passion of mine, the continent and these issues of conflict. We've worked on these for a number of years, so I want to thank you for your leadership and the leadership of this committee. I will be asking sort of cross-examination questions, and I thank you for indulging me on these. It looks as if Mr. Kony has been here since the beginning of civilization. It looks like it's been so long that my frustration level has gone. Now you're telling me that his children, and if we're here and blessed by life, and you come back and tell me his grandchildren, then I know that we're, not that you're doing something, that we haven't done what we needed to do. So if I might draw something to the chairman's attention, and I want to submit into the record, and please note that I'm going to make the connection as we do sometimes in the courtroom in a prosecution case, but I want to note, Mr. Chairman, the speech of President Buhari of Nigeria before the United Nations, and I want to commend some language very quickly. I'd ask unanimous consent if I might put this in the record.
No objections. So
where he speaks about peace. He talks about the sustainable efforts of the United Nations, and he says Nigeria has contributed to UN peacekeeping efforts in Ethiopia, Liberia, Sierra Leone, etc., just to reflect upon what they've done in the past. Then they go on to say that peace is close to the hearts of Nigerians. We are in the front line in the war on terror. Boko Haram's war against the people of Nigeria, Chad, Niger, Cameroon may not attract as much worldwide attention as the wars in the Middle East, but the people are suffering. This war is about values between progress and chaos, between democracy and the rule of law. Boko Haram celebrates violence against the weak and the innocent, and deplorably they hide behind their perverted interpretation of Islam. Boko Haram is as far away from Islam as anyone can think. So I make the nexus to, first I want to congratulate the newly elected president, Mr. Buhari. We met with him in Nigeria, and he made a commitment that he was going to end the siege of Boko Haram by the end of 2015. So I raise these questions about the involvement. First, my number one question is, and let me mind my manners and thank all of the witnesses, and particularly Ms. Thalen, thank you for your passion. And of course, 10,000, as you well know, the story of the fishes and loaves, you may know it. It's in the Christian faith, which means you get a little bit and then it multiplies. And we look forward to seeing your work multiply. But my questions to you, and I again want to offer sympathy to Ms. Thalen for losing over 24 of your family members, and I think sometimes we tend to forget that. But on this issue of Mr. Kony, who now has, he's passing his legacy on, I have several questions. One, where is the African Union in this, and where are the surrounding nations? I know, obviously, in Central Africa, he's surrounded by a number of Uganda, Rwanda, but where is the African Union as its ability under its charter to utilize troops in this instance? The other is on the question of the gold, the diamonds, and the obviously the ivory. What role does American consumers, purchasers, individuals like the dentist who went to Zimbabwe almost as I was there, and unfortunately saw the demise of Cedric the lion. But what role do we play in that? And have you any comment on the, or let me say that I thank them, but I just want to know what the comment might be as the U.S. Special Operations are pointedly working and have drawn together some unique characters as their collaborators under the African Union. I happen to be a strong, African Command. I happen to be a strong supporter of AFRICOM because it was under our watch a couple of years ago that we fought for AFRICOM, in this instance, the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Congressional Black Caucus, and I think they play a vital role for peace in Africa. So I think I see you taking notes, so I'll yield on those questions, and I know that you will, in your answers, as you did to the chairman, say what we can do. But I don't think I can hear one more moment that the grandchildren now have taken over from Kony without us bringing this to an end. Let me thank you very much.
So I would have to say that when the African Union got to Dungu, I received a lot of call from my family that everybody was happy that the presence was there at that time, because in 4 years, that was the first time people could be outside of the compound in the morning, early morning, or in the evening. The hours that mostly LRA was supposed to attack. And also, when U.S. Special Advisor came, everything seems to be nice, but again, it just look like things are they're not pursuing Kony, and it's taking it too long, because even though the presence is there, the LRA is still abducting people. They will come past the United Nations compound, I don't know how, and in a few meters from the compound, and abduct people in a bright light day, and attack and the killing. So people sometimes are so disappointed that, okay, America is a superpower. So if really they decided to capture Kony, they would do so in no time, but it's taking too long. But they are thankful that you're doing what you're doing already and hoping that it will be captured sometime soon.
Thank you, Madam. And I'd only say to you that when we have our U.S. Special Ops on the ground, you can be assured they are focused and pointed and maybe sometimes unseen, but purposely functioning. I hope that the chairman, I heard his question before, but I'd like to find a way to get a further answer from the African Union, not from you. I heard what you said. For their enhanced work, they may be at the limits of what they can do, and with that collaboration, the African Union, of course, doing what they're doing and the limits of what we can do with our particular guidelines of use on the continent. I can assure you, if the special ops of the United States military, particularly AFRICOM, are there, that they're focused. But I thank you two gentlemen. If you could take a stab at the other two, and I will listen as I have to run to the floor. But thank you so very much. Thank you, Madam, very much for that answer.
Thank you so much for your questions. Just regarding the ivory and the gold and the diamonds, you know, the most ivory goes to China for consumption there, but there is still some that comes here. And so the Congress's efforts to combat wildlife trafficking are very important, and the new Obama administration draft regulations on that are starting to put in place a ban on ivory trade in the United States are very important. The Fish and Wildlife Service came out recently with a de minimis exception for some very limited ivory trade, you know, for example, in like bows of violins and cellos and those kind of things. You know, there's a danger that if you allow that de minimis exception to be too high, that in fact that would be a major loophole. And we would not want that. You can break a tusk into 100 pieces, 1,000 pieces. You know, that doesn't make the trade any less valuable. So what we really need to do is cut that trade down and make sure that de minimis exception is very low. So any efforts from Congress to weigh in with the administration on that issue would be more than welcome. New York State already has that de minimis exception. California is also passing a law on this, waiting for the governor's signature. So with regard to, and also pressing China on this issue, we were very happy to see the president pressing the Chinese president just last week on the ivory, and they did come out with a pretty strong statement on that, but that needs follow-up. You know, that this is a pretty lucrative business out there. With regard to gold and diamonds, gold is still a commodity that's used for money laundering, terrorist financing. There was a recent FATF report which talked about gold and money laundering and use by various rebel groups around the world, including in Congo. And in particular, there are some conflict traders out there that need to be the focus of investigations and targeted sanctions. We ourselves are investigating some of those in the Middle East at the moment, and we'll be happy to provide the committee with, or the subcommittee with more information on that as we get it. We are writing a report and have some whistleblowers within some of these organizations that are trading the conflict gold. I'll let Paul answer that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
On the AU involvement, I think that the African Union's approach to counter LRA was unique in the sense that the force that they have deployed is an AU authorized force and not an AU mandated force. And that distinction has basically meant that the AU itself is providing very little support to the Ugandan, the South Sudanese, the Central African, and the Congolese troops that are out there. So it's really up to the countries themselves to equip their troops, which would be different than how most AU and UN peacekeeping operations work. And unfortunately, you know, if the LRA is operating your country, it's kind of the canary in the coal mine. It's not the reason why your country is allowing a group like this to operate, but it's taking advantage of that. So by leaving it up to the countries themselves to provide all of the support to their troops, we are left where we are now, which is that the Ugandans are really the only force out there that is capable of really pursuing the LRA, and even their capacity has been very, very limited. So I think that this has revealed some of the weaknesses from an AU and an international perspective, as far as how they approach this, and reinforces the need, to make sure that we have adequate troops there, and that they have the equipment that they need to actually pursue the LRA in an effective manner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you so very much. You've given me work to do. Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman, for your kindness.
Glad to have you. That concludes the hearing. First of all, I want to just thank you on behalf of the subcommittee, for your testimonies and your leadership. It is a privilege to receive expert testimony from such highly informed, highly motivated, and wise leaders. We really benefit greatly. The people who are suffering will benefit from this, as they have already by your leadership. And we will contact the administration, because I know that's why we did it now, to get your insights right now so that they make the right decision, which I believe they will do, to keep this important program going. So anything you want to ever add, within a timely period of time for this hearing, but also on the issue itself, particularly as it relates to the other countries. Members of this subcommittee, including the chairman and Greg Simpkins, our chief of staff, and other members of the staff, we are in constant contact with the leaders of these countries, and if there's something we need to convey to Museveni or any of these other people, please let us know, and we can bring that word to them again from such experts. The hearing's adjourned.